Welcome, everybody. Looks like we have a few attendees. Welcome to our CAS webinar on how do I engage learners remotely. We have a bit.ly that should be on your screen. You can go to that bit.ly and you can access the slides, and there'll be speaker notes in the slides explaining each of the slides. And as our tech person Ari has said in the chat, if you have any troubles getting on or hearing me talk, I'm talking now. If you have any trouble hearing me talk, you can get on the phone, and the phone number is in the chat. So let's get started. So my name is Melissa Sanjay, and I'm an implementation specialist for CAS. CAS is an educational nonprofit that developed the Universal Design for Learning guidelines. And myself and a few implementation specialists have been working in New Hampshire with educators like yourself on the implementation of Universal Design for Learning. And as things have developed over the last week, if schools have moved to remote learning, we thought about all those dedicated educators we've been working with in New Hampshire and across the nation, and we wanted to help you as you meet this new challenge. So again, my name is Melissa Sanjay. I'm going to let my colleague Susan introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Susan Shapiro on the team with Melissa, and just really interested in this being a two-way learning opportunity. So feel free to jump into the chat and tell us what you need. We're really working hard to design professional learning in lots of forms to help and support teachers who are doing some challenging work right now.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Susan. And as Susan said, in ways of being two-way, we move quickly to try to meet and plan to address this challenge. And we decided we wanted to be responsive to your needs as educators and get ideas and tools that you could use immediately when you're moving your teaching and learning to a remote space, but also response to what questions you're asking. So in this webinar, we will not be talking about UDL. We won't be teaching UDL, but rather we want to use UDL as a lens to help find answers to the questions you may have in this new uncharted territory. And we know you're all professional educators and you have many strategies to pull from. So some of these strategies may be things you already know, but in times of crisis, it doesn't hurt to go back to the basics. So if you know it, we'll just check it off and move on. And we did some crowdsourcing. So we sent out to some of the educators we're working with to find out what you're thinking about and where do you want ideas. And so we did a 4-part webinar series to react to those questions. So the first one happened yesterday. And it was about communication between your students, between you and your students, and with each other during this time. It's been recorded. It's up on Learning Designed. And I don't know if Ari could put in the chat the Learning Design link. But the second one, you're attending now, so welcome. This is how do I engage learners remotely. Tomorrow, I believe Susan will be discussing how to share content with learners remotely. And then on Monday, Bill will be talking about how do learners share their understanding remotely. So that's the big picture of the 4-part webinar series that we're working on. So in each of our webinars, we're going to deliver a little content and ideas in response to those questions, and then we're going to have time for Q&A. So I probably won't be talking. We probably won't be talking for more than 10-ish minutes. And then the Q&A can happen in the chat. You can just type it in, your questions in, and we'll do our best to answer them. But to get us started, our first webinar here is how do I engage learners remotely. So when we're thinking about this unique situation that you and your learners are in, you're used to being in the same surroundings day in and day out with routines, protocols, and customs, and now you're suddenly all in separate contexts and trying to connect online by phone and email, in some cases by mail. So some educators reached out to us and they asked, how do I ensure engagement when I am not in the same room with my students and they are not in the same rooms with one another? So we find it useful to think about engagement in about 3 different buckets. The first bucket is how do I get them interested? Then how do I get them working and keep working, persist through their challenges? And then how do I help them self-manage their emotions as they persist? So we'll start with the first bucket. How do I get them interested? And when we're thinking about this remote setting, one thing we can do is try to optimize as much choice as possible. Can they pick the book? Can they pick the product? Can they decide how they show what they've learned? Can they have some choices as they're navigating this new thing? Another thing is to make learning as relevant to their current situation as possible. I heard there's one history teacher that's asking students to do a living history project and to document their family's experience through journaling and some other tools of this social distancing 2020. So we want to try to create content that matters to them and something that feels relevant to them right now. And we can also make expectations clear, but learning flexible. So maybe they know when they have to post things on Google Classroom, but maybe they have a choice for what they post. And we want to do everything possible to make these first few weeks low stakes. They might be doing these new communication functions. They might be using Google Classroom for the first time. So have them practice those new communication tools, doing things that are fun. What's your favorite movie? Where did you have for dinner? They're learning a new way of being a student. And so this first week of remote learning, it's as if we're starting the school year over again from the start. The next bucket that we talk about of questions are around sustaining engagement. So one question in particular was, how do I ensure my students are putting in the same effort of learning when I'm not there? And I'm sure this is on everyone's mind, and it's quite possible the answer is we can't know for sure. So what some educators have found useful, as I said before, is just think about this as the beginning of the school year. It's time to set up our routines again and expectations. And we should expect that we're going to falter, they're going to falter as we get used to this new way of learning. So with that said, there's some ways that we do think about sustaining effort and think about encouraging sustained effort. So the first was to find multiple ways for them to communicate with you and each other. One teacher suggested setting up a buddy system, partnering your students with each other, and another child in their class, asking them to check in with each other once a day or partner those students on assignments, and offer multiple ways to get in touch with you. Susan and I were on a call this morning, a live chat, and some people wanted their cameras on, some people didn't want their cameras on. So sometimes it's some kids are going to want to text, some kids are going to want to see you. So you can use text change, Google Docs, ways for people to check in emotionally to build community. And I would say let's focus on community right now. How's it going for everyone? How have you set up your learning space? Do you have a fuzzy rug like my niece has in her learning space? What do you like about remote learning? And you can build community through fun activities like house scavenger hunts, posting the pics, virtual card games, board games, other ways to establish community. Also, make sure to respond to the work that the students are submitting, because you want them to know that you know that they are working, and that's important to you. That feedback loop is going to be super important when you're not there. You want them to know that you notice. And during this time, it's important to make learning goals clear and relevant so they understand why they're doing the work. As we said before, things need to be relevant, because as things get stressful, students may have a difficult time understanding, why do I need to know geometry? I don't really know what's going on right now, so why do I need to know geometry? So the more you can connect their current context to the real world, the more likely they are to sustain through the learning. And don't forget to build in breaks for you and for your students. Everybody needs to be easy on themselves as we learn this new way of doing things. And as Susan says, remember, less is more. Do you want to say more about that, Susan?
Sure. I think it's really true. I think sometimes, well, I know for myself and for teachers I've talked with recently, like when we hear the word remote learning, all of a sudden I think, oh my gosh, I knew I should have learned about Vocaroo. I knew I should have learned about Google Chat and Hangout, and I don't know the technology. But I love what you said, Melissa, about the first week of learning, or the first 6 weeks sometimes when we're thinking about younger learners, that we do a lot of activities and a lot of things, but we have one really simple goal, and that is that we're building community, that we're engaging learners, that we're giving people that sense of a safe community space that they can walk into and say, this was designed for me. They knew that I was coming here. And I think sometimes in our attempt to do a lot, we can lose sight of that goal. So, less is more, quality over quantity. And I saw a great quote that Edutopia, a wonderful educational organization, posted about the learning and the lessons thus far from remote learning in Italy. And it was really just, simple. Maybe a book, maybe a math paper, maybe a little bit of contact, but not trying to create school at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
I shouldn't say that. Yes, we're trying to create school at home, but not trying to create school exactly as it is in the building,
Right.
in varied homes with varied resources and schedules and, you know, environments.
Yeah. And I know that folks have different expectations depending on their districts and their schools. But as Susan says, the extent that you can sort of slow down the content a little bit and develop it in bite-sized pieces, I think the easier it'll be for everyone to sustain their effort through this. And the last group of questions that we're asking around engagement is how do I help my learners regulate their emotions? A lot of the questions that we got, that we crowdsourced, were about student anxiety, about being in a new situation, and inconsistent home environments. And we know the home environment is not in our locus of control, but so we have to think of ways we can help students mitigate for their work, to work through those emotions as they work through their schoolwork. So some tips we have: as much as possible, use the tools that the students are already familiar with, so they're not learning a new tool in a new environment. And there's a lot of tools available for communication with students, and some are more accessible than others. So for students who are using assistive technology, even if the tool is accessible, if they had not had the opportunity to practice that with an educator ahead of time, it may still be inaccessible to them. So that's one of the reasons we continue to recommend a variety of tools and options so students can choose what will work for them and what will be accessible for them. And if there's no way around using a new tool, try to maybe keep the same protocols. So if you have to move to Google Classroom and no one's done that before, maybe you can keep a familiar routine where you do math in the morning and English in the afternoon, or you always have a morning meeting, just something to try to keep a sense of pace and normalcy. Also, try to have some check-ins with the students throughout the day. How's the day going? Is the work clear? Have them reflect on how they felt through the day. Ask them what's on their mind. Are they worried? Some schools are doing Google Hangouts for the entire sixth grade. I'm not sure how that's going to go, but I heard about that yesterday. They're doing an entire sixth grade at 9:30 is going to get on Google Meets. And then at 2:30, they're going to get on Google Meets. And the kids are going to hang out with each other. Teachers are going to check in with them. Some other schools are using shared Google Docs, while others might be using an app called YoTeach. So just find some ways for the learners to see your face, see each other's face, hear each other's voices, just connect, because they're going to be missing you and they're going to be missing each other.
And I'll just jump in if I can, Melissa.
Yes.
One of the things that we've been hearing, we've been holding some live chats to hear from teachers about the issues that they're facing. And one of the things that struck us is the very different ways that schools are making decisions around, can we use video in people's homes?
Mm-hmm.
Can we not? You know, can we send things? Can we not send things? What are the sort of policies and protocols? And so for everything that we're talking about here, just kind of always saying that big sentence, which is check with your building principal, right? Make sure that you're, you know, following the protocols of the school, because it sounds like in many communities, those are really different from other communities. And, you know, certainly something to pay attention to.
Yes, yes, for sure. And just a final note, remind the students that you have belief in them and that they have everything that they need to do this work. You've been preparing them throughout the year, and they can do this. And we kind of want to say too, as CAS, that we believe in you and we know you can do this. And this is a different context. And as Susan said, not everything in the classroom can be translated one-to-one. You can't bring this table home for every student, but you do know how to do this. And we believe that you have a wealth of knowledge and skills and creativity. And so that's why we structured it this way, so that we can have a Q&A and we can hear from you and some of the things that you are doing and some of the things that you have seen be successful, and we can pass that on to other educators and try to create that learning community. So with that said, it's time to move on to our Q&A section. So if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat, and we will do our best to answer them, or maybe put some resources on learning design if we can't answer them in the moment.
Or ideas or resources that you want to share, really anything that strikes you.
Yeah.
One thing that came up this morning, I'll just chat while people are thinking about questions or comments, is a first grade teacher said that when she first started thinking about doing this work and her teaching remotely, she felt like she had to teach the next 10 lessons that she had in the lesson plan book, ready to go. Like, now I've got to deliver these remotely. And it took her a little bit of thinking and reflecting to realize her real goal right now was to establish community in a different context and to sustain and maintain the skills that learners had. Now, not knowing how long this model would last, that might shift and change over time. But I think her own shoulders kind of came down when she realized if she could just help learners to practice some of those skills, help them stay connected, help them feel good about themselves as learners, that would be a big goal, a big set of goals for this first period. Do I see a question there?
Yes, I'll read it for you. Do you have any ideas on how to maintain contact with students who do not have computers?
Such a great question. And I think it's one of the most important pieces. We know despite every strategy, wonderful idea, wonderful technology tool, we know that it's about relationships, right? And there's nothing out there that's stronger than that human relationship. So I was talking with a teacher this morning who was sending a photocopy of the class picture to every single child at home, just because she knew that there would be some kids who really needed to just kind of take a look at that from time to time. We talked about setting up drop-in chats for parents and caregivers. That came up as a way of maintaining communication and contact. And then also for parents and caregivers that may not have the capacity to be on some of the video. Zoom is able to be used on the telephone. So there were some teachers talking about using Zoom as a way of checking in parents, caregivers, and with learners.
Yeah, and if they do have access to cell phones, if they don't have access to computers, but they do have access to cell phones, you can set up a Google Voice account, and you can text your learners that way, and you can send them pictures of yourself or maybe little videos. You could share things that way. The mail is still running, so all else fails. We have the U.S. Postal Service that's been around for hundreds of years, right? So I heard of somebody thinking about sending stickers to their students as they complete things, because stickers is something that's really important in their classroom culture. So she wanted to send those home to students. So those are some of our ideas. And it says, when given the choice, someone says, when given the choice, my son chose phone calls. And so no video is needed because his son wanted to talk to his teacher on a phone call.
I think it's also really important to know the purpose of the communication. So I've been putting together some lists of thoughts for teachers, and one of the things is this notion of predictable supports, right? So what are the predictable supports in a classroom, and how do we replicate those in the remote learning environment? So in a classroom as a learner, one of the things I know is if I have a question that has to be answered right now, I have a way that I know in our classroom that happens, or I'm thinking about an elementary classroom as I say that, but in a high school classroom, there's a way that happens. In some classes it's formal, some classes it's informal, but there's a strategy. If I have something that I want to spend time talking to the teacher about one-on-one, there's a process for that. There's a way for me to do that. If I want to ask a friend, there's a way for me to do that. So I think that setting up those predictable supports, those predictable communication routes for learners and for families. We're hearing a lot about how important it is to support families. One teacher said, I almost feel like I'm a coach to parents and caregivers more than I'm teaching. But so I think, one part of my mind is like, what are all the ways we can communicate with learners? But that can make me feel a little overwhelmed. If I think about what are the purposes of that communication, I can be a little more strategic in thinking about specific tools or strategies or things that we already do for both kids who use and have access to internet. And I shouldn't just say access to, who have access to a device that's free. And internet, free meaning no one's using it at that time, because we also know that limited access is a barrier to some of the ideas that we have. So ideas for kids who have access to virtual learning, and also ideas for kids who have don't have that access, and getting really clear about the purpose. Maybe for kids who don't have that access and they're not using email, maybe they can call you on the telephone to have a question answered. So you're setting up those ways for kids with purposes.
Yeah. And also to remember that some families are large and they don't have a device for every student. So being strategic about being flexible about how and when students communicate if they're having to share devices, phones, tablets, anything with other students.
Melissa, if you want to answer the question about what do you mean by offering students choices, I'll read the next one
Okay.
while you answer Jennifer's question.
Okay. So what do we mean by offering students choice? So it's similar to what Susan was talking about around knowing what is the purpose and what is the goal of the communication. Once you know what the goal is of your lesson, then you offer students choice within that goal. So if the goal of your lesson is to help students decode text or read, then maybe you offer them different options for what book they might read as you send materials home. Similar to if the goal is for them to write a paragraph, what can they have a choice of how they write that paragraph? And if the goal is a content goal around learning about the water cycle, then do they have an option of how they demonstrate to you what they know about that water cycle, or even an option of whether they read a book about it, they watch a video about it, or they listen to a podcast about it. So that's kind of what we mean around choices. Anything that you would add to make that more clear, Susan?
No, because I wasn't listening. I was reading the question.
So yeah. Okay, I'm so ready for the next question.
The next question is about special education supports and services. And this person, I don't want to call you L. Brown too, but talks about being a special educator for pre-K and second grade. They had to prepare packets of materials for the next 3 weeks since not all students have computers at home. And wondered if in yesterday's discussion, I'm assuming the discussion of community and communication, that other webinar, if there were any conversations about special ed components. And I don't think, having sat in on that dialogue, I don't think that there were specifically, but I'm really glad for you to bring this question up here, because certainly engagement and learners who have labels of disability, it's a really big piece of what we need to focus on. So depending on the school, we know that some schools are bringing some learners sometimes to the building for services that cannot be delivered any other way, and that's a district by district decision. We know that some schools are working to use the same good co-teaching models that happen in the brick and mortar building and to bring those supports to the remote learning context. So in that same way, I was a special education teacher years ago, and I can remember saying, hey, I made a little graphic organizer to support comprehension for this text. And then the classroom teacher might say, like, hey, can I use that with everybody else? So are there ways that we can, pair some of those supports? And as I think about it, the level of stress and anxiety might change the context enough that learners who might not have needed that graphic organizer for comprehension support might actually need it in the home environment or in an online setting. And then finally, I know that in some districts, they are, I think the term that the state and the Office of Special Education uses is compensatory services, that there will be some plans made when kids do return to school to kind of backtrack a little bit and make sure that we fulfill the requirements of the IEP. So that's kind of the long answer. I think in the short answer, it's how do we do what we do so well in the building in the virtual remote learning environment? How do we co-teach? How do we get things in advance and make adaptations and accommodations as needed? How do we really pay attention to accessibility, right? How do we make sure that the stuff that we're putting in place for our classes to ask questions or stay connected or have a morning meeting are accessible tools and resources? And if you're interested in learning more about accessibility, I know there will be some additional supports, but there are currently supports at the AIM Center, the Accessible Educational Materials Center, and maybe you could stick that link in the chat.
And Jennifer has also stuck a link in the chat that is about New Hampshire offering accessibility webinars over the next month. So
great. I know those are coming up. Super.
Yeah. All right. So if there's no other questions, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. Maybe I'll give a minute for folks. And Ari put in the National Center of Accessible Education Materials in there for folks to look for accessibility resources. That's in the chat as well.
And feel free to reach out to us at any time. We think about this as an ongoing dialogue, not as like a, now you know how to do engagement in the remote learning environment. So definitely, and thanks for putting our email addresses up there.
Yes.
Definitely feel free to reach out to have conversations and also to share ideas so we can recycle them for others.
And to remind you that we have 2 more of these webinars, one tomorrow and one Monday. And so you can find the links for those on Learning Designed. And we are going to be making a recording of this and putting it, well, we've been currently recording it, but we'll be putting it together and putting it up on Learning Design with some accompanying resources, which we'll do for each of our webinars. So keep going back to Learning Design, and there should be content coming daily, coming up there on Learning Design. So thank you for joining us, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you for chatting with me, Susan.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.